That's correct. It's all good. Okay, so I've in a difficult place. In the last few weeks, we've had a lot of bad news. Not to say that we haven't had bad news in the past. And if you're looking at Canada, I hate to tell you this, and you probably figured it out already. If you were in, let's say, Norway, and you were debating the legalization of euthanasia, I'm telling them, look at Canada. This is your reason not to do it. Okay? We've talked about the Netherlands and Belgium for years and all the things going on, and I can show you data from the Netherlands and Belgium. But you know what's happening in Canada is we're catching up so quick, but we're also jumping past them. It is becoming a ridiculous situation. The latest thing in the leaders' debate about Quebec. Now, you might remember when Mr. Lametti was appointed the new Attorney General. You know, the whole kerfuffle that went on about the previous and the whole situation. Anyway, he was the one who had voted against euthanasia in the Liberal Party because the bill was not, how would you say, liberal enough. It was not progressive enough. It was too tight, he said. So he voted against it, and now he's our Attorney General, Justice Minister. Anyway, he had said, oh, well, we're not going to look at it, the issue, until much after the election because we have a 5-year review starting in June of 2020. So there's going to be a 5-year review starting in June of 2020. But then how come during the leaders' debate, Mr. Trudeau announces that not only was he not going to appeal the Quebec recent court decision, but also that he's going to amend the law soon after returning to Parliament. So why would you do that when you've got a review? Like, what is it? Is it a review coming up, or we're going to impose a wider law? Like, what's happening? Tell me. Of course, it doesn't matter to them. It's not about democracy, truth, or justice. It's about how you want to be seen before a certain group of voters, etc. You might remember this whole story. How many saw the story of Alan Nichols, who was on CTV? Very few of you saw it. That's good, because you're not watching the television. I'm very happy you're not watching the television. But this one was good to watch, and if you were seeing certain news items, you would have noticed this. What happened is about a month ago, I got a call from the Nichols family who were very upset about the death of their brother Alan. Alan was 61 years old. He had no medical condition. He didn't have cancer. He didn't have ALS. He didn't have, you can start naming them off, he didn't have it. What he had was, when he was 12 years old, he had had a brain tumor, and they did surgery on him when he was 12. Now he's 61. And since that, and the surgery was successful, he worked his life as a janitor. He had a full life. Now he's been experiencing for many, 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 many years chronic depression. He goes in and out of deep, deep depression. And this is the family thought this is probably related to his surgery at age 12, but of course you don't really know. The fact was this is what his life experience was. There was something else about it I'm going to tell you that you wouldn't have seen from the news items. Alan had a hard time accepting any changes. Now, he wasn't autistic. I have an autistic son, so I understand autism. Once again, the family thought it was related to his surgery when he was 12. That's something about his brain. He had a hard time accepting any changes. So what happened is he had a brother who was regularly coming to visit him, would take him shopping, who would take care of making sure his bills were paid and everything else. And his brother was a regular part of his life. His other brother was in Edmonton. So, they were on the phone together, but they weren't together. But he had family involvement in his life. He was living on his own, though. So what happened is his brother had a long-term goal of wanting to see the East Coast. And we're not talking Ontario. I'm talking Newfoundland and that sort of thing. And so he had told Alan, I'm going to be going. He had booked this trip ahead of time. He says, I made sure Alan knew all about it, that everything was talked about, so Alan wouldn't be shocked by this. But what happened is that his brother went to the East Coast on this trip of his, this lifetime goal of seeing the East Coast of Canada. And something else happened at the same time. The Safeway store near Alan's house, the store that he always bought his groceries at, closed. Shut down. So he had a dual problem here. His brother, who always goes shopping and takes care of things with him and is always with him for these things, was on vacation on the East Coast, and the Safeway store has closed. He only went to that Safeway store. So his neighbor noticed that he wasn't coming out. His windows weren't, his blinds were closed. There was no movement in the house. Nothing was happening. So his neighbor called the police. The RCMP came and they found him. He hadn't eaten in days. He looked dehydrated. He was brought to the hospital. And then he was put into psychiatric care for what? To protect himself because they thought he was suicidal. Alan. Alan then asks for euthanasia. Alan gets approved for euthanasia. This is a family that's shocked by this. And they're calling up wanting, how do we achieve justice for Alan? This is a family who was in favor of euthanasia. Like I was talking to his sister-in-law, and they're all in favor, but they thought what happened to their brother Alan was absolutely wrong. That was what was wrong. But people who are suffering and everything, well, that's okay. But for Alan, because he only has psychological issues and everything, that would be wrong. Wrong. Now, he didn't qualify technically under the law.
Alex, how long did it take after he asked until he was euthanized?
10 days. Well, it was actually a couple days longer, because what happened is that the doctor had approved his euthanasia death, and they did use the full 10-day waiting period. And so what happened is that he had no will. He had nothing like that. So when the doctor came to do the euthanasia, the doctor just went through a few little things with Alan. He didn't have a will. He didn't have, you name it. He just didn't have it, right? Never done it. And therefore, he said, well, the doctor said, well, why don't you do that first? And so a lawyer came in, and Alan actually appointed the lawyer as his power of attorney, and the lawyer was the executor of the will, not the family. Very wrong. Anyway, the Nichols family were called then 4 days before his death. What happened is the doctor called up and said, oh, by the way, your brother's been approved for euthanasia. And of course, they didn't know. Now, the one brother who was constantly taking him grocery shopping and that, he was then around. Okay, he was there. But they gave him no information. He was regularly visiting. No one bothered to say, oh, by the way, your brother is asking for medical aid and dying. What do you think about that? Okay. And in the very end, Alan wouldn't change his mind. The doctors wouldn't help with anything. They wouldn't stop it. They wouldn't get involved. They just thought, well, that's fine. That's what Alan wants, even though he didn't qualify whatsoever. So here we're having this conversation, and I'm explaining to them, well, we have a problem with the law. Now, how many of you read the stuff I wrote about the law when the law was first passed, how bad this law is? There's a few of you. I see some hands. Good. You guys are great. You actually read this stuff. You should read my stuff. It's very good. It helps you know what's going on. So what does the law say? The law says you must be experiencing either physical or psychological suffering. And then it says that you must have a condition which cannot be treated in any other way that you consider acceptable. Then it says that your natural death must be reasonably foreseeable, which the Quebec court just dealt with. Right? The Quebec court just dealt with that, sadly. And it also, said about the doctor must assure all these things, right? The doctor, and then it said the doctor must be of the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. Now, if you remember me writing about that, what was I saying? I said that law was designed that the doctor who does anything which should be considered questionable is legally covered. The doctor or nurse practitioner must only be of the opinion that you fit the criteria of the law. Well, we're always of the opinion. Like I'm of the lots of opinions, okay? Sadly. The family supported me, but were opposed to what happened to Alan. So after a long discussion, and I sent them information about the law and everything, they were shocked. They said, well, that's not what we would have supported. And I said, well, most Canadians probably wouldn't have supported the language of the bill. Nonetheless, that's what we have. It was a quote, quote, liberal compromise. So after a long discussion, and they thought that they could charge the doctor, that there could be charges, that the RCMP would investigate. They've asked for an investigation. They've pushed for all these different things. And my response is, well, I doubt the RCMP will investigate. Hopefully they will, but I doubt it. But I thought that maybe Avis Favreau would be interested in this case, and that's exactly what happened. Now, a few of you saw it. I was going to play the clip. What I can do, is it live? Oh, it is live. Good stuff. I can just show it to you. No, it says the program is not registered to open the file, so we're not going to open the file. It's all good. No problem. And we'll go back. So anyway, this is an interesting situation because now we have a clear case of the law and the criteria of the law clearly not being followed, but what can you do about it? What can you do about it? Now remember what happened in Quebec recently. So let's go into this, because this all comes together now. So Bill C-14, what did it state? It stated that a person qualifies for euthanasia based on physical or psychological suffering if their natural death is reasonably foreseeable, but they didn't define that. Now, of course, all of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. What did this do, though, putting that natural death must be reasonably foreseeable in it? What it did do is it intended to deny people like Alan Nichols to be considered qualified for euthanasia because they had psychological suffering alone, right? Because it said that you must have these qualifications. So if his natural death was not reasonably foreseeable, he could not qualify for euthanasia. I think what happened in his case, now the problem is the family doesn't know. These are all privacy issues, and they've been asking for the information. But remember, the family is not power of attorney to him. At the very end, he appointed that lawyer who he didn't even know, right? So anyway, the point is that, what do you do? Anyway, in June 2017, Justice Paul Perel, now you might remember this, the Superior Court of Ontario decided that AB, so they didn't want to use her name because it was a privacy issue, who was a 77-year-old woman with osteoarthritis, qualified for euthanasia, even though her natural death was not reasonably foreseeable. So what Paul Perel said in Ontario, Justice Perel said, is he said, if you fit all the other criteria, then you also fit the criteria that your natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. Now, the Ontario government never appealed that decision. Remember, that was under our previous Liberal government. It was never appealed, so therefore that became law in Ontario because it was never appealed. Now remember, because it becomes law only in Ontario, that it would be ridiculous to say that that doesn't also apply to British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, because if anybody were to question it, remember, you've already got precedent in Ontario, there's no way that they would find someone did something wrong if it was okay in Ontario to do it, but not in Saskatchewan, as an example. Let's be brutally honest. The decision applied to Ontario, but really it applied to Canada. Perel decided, and this is what Perel said, AB's case qualifies as she is almost 80 years old. How many of you are almost 80? You're good to go. As she is almost 80-year-old woman in an advanced state of incurable, irreversible, worsening illness with excruciating pain and no quality of life. Well, okay. I was running on a Friday morning, and after the run, I did 9K, and after the run, I was experiencing significant pain, questionable quality of life. Did I qualify? No, I was only 51. So that's what he said. It was not appealed. So now we have recently the Quebec decision, which was the Truchon decision. Gladue, Nicole Gladue actually was the one who launched the decision, but the case anyway, and Jean Truchon. They have disabilities, but their natural deaths were not reasonably foreseeable. Both of them had chronic conditions, but were not terminally ill in any way, shape, or form. The Quebec Superior Court just decided, how many of you saw this decision, saw this information? You should have seen it. Even if you don't watch the news, you should have saw it. If you didn't, well, you should get my emails. The Quebec Superior Court decided that the provision in the Criminal Code was unconstitutional and discriminatory. The Quebec and federal governments have 30 days to appeal the decision. Now, what did Mr. Trudeau say during the debate? He would not be appealing the decision. The Quebec government already said what? They would not be appealing the decision. That means the decision will not be appealed, even though, as I said to Mr. Lametti in a letter, even if you agree with this decision, this should be appealed because there's significant legal questions within the decision of the court that should be settled properly. So even if you don't agree, even if you agree with that decision, guess what? This has a wide-ranging effect. You should be appealing. Right? You should be appealing. Just for a matter of law, you should be doing that for such a big decision. Now that this provision has been struck from the law, it means that the euthanasia lobby will extend euthanasia to people with chronic conditions and people with psychological suffering alone, such as Alan Nichols. Right? Now, how many of you are feeling some psychological pain now that I'm discussing this with you for a little while? Well, you should be experiencing a bit of psychological pain, so you now qualify. And the pain cannot be, how would you say, remittent with any way that would make you happy. So anyway, a similar case in Truchon was launched in BC soon after Bill C-14 was passed. So you might have realized Bill C-14 was passed on June the 17th of 2016. A few days later, what happened? The BC Court of Appeal, the BC Civil Liberties Association launched the Lamb case. And who was Julia Lamb? Julia Lamb was a woman who is clearly not dying, but has a chronic disability, and her condition will worsen over time. She has a degenerative condition. Therefore, it was determined at that time that her natural death was not reasonably foreseeable, whatever that means. So the Crown and the BC, and we gained intervener standing in the Lamb case, and so therefore all that paperwork went back and forth I got to read. And so what happened is, previous to the decision in Quebec, the BC Civil Liberties Association petitioned the Crown and the Court to drop the case. And they had a 50-page document as to why it should be dropped. One of the reasons it should be dropped is because reasonably foreseeable had now been defined through a practice of euthanasia in Canada, as well as, of course, the Ontario court decision, etc. And so what they were saying is, at this point, as much as Julia Lamb is not dying, her natural death would be deemed reasonably foreseeable, and she would now qualify for euthanasia. So in fact, the Quebec Superior Court did not need to strike down that part of the law, because if you read the evidence, it's clear that the law was already being interpreted to allow these people to have euthanasia anyway, right? Because it's already being interpreted that way, therefore why strike it down? It has no meaning. You're striking down something without meaning. Now what they were doing, of course, is getting rid of something which was attempting to limit euthanasia to people who actually might have a terminal condition, but certainly it was limiting it to people with psychological conditions alone. And based on the fact of and it was also based mainly on the AB decision, Lamb, they said, qualified for euthanasia already. So this is where we're going. See where we're going? Very fast, very quick. Now wait a second. That's what I needed to show you, so I got my slide out of order. So the federal government has been very slow in reporting. So when you notice these news reports, they'll say, oh, there's been 4,000 euthanasias in Canada, where it might have been 6,200, da, da, da. Well, they're always wrong, because of course the data has been very slow in coming out. And so what happened is, last March, Jocelyn Downey was giving a presentation in Ottawa, and in her presentation, she explained that the euthanasia numbers in Canada, and as of December 31st, 2018, she said there had been 7,949 euthanasia deaths. Well, actually, there was 7,943 euthanasia deaths, 6 assisted suicide deaths in Canada between its beginning and to that present time. So therefore, this is, and I checked the numbers, and actually it's really quite accurate. See, so Jocelyn Downey, who is she? She's the leading academic euthanasia activist in Canada, okay? And she has also, what else did she receive? She received significant money for research from whom? The Trudeau Foundation. Now, it's not Justin who runs the Trudeau Foundation, but I believe his brother Sasha is sort of in charge of it. But anyway, a key player in it. So, you know, Downey is considered important enough to get Trudeau money. Anyway, so how did the numbers actually fall out? Well, there was 1,010 between December 10th. Now, what's important about December 10th? That's when Quebec legalized euthanasia. So December 10th, 2015 and December 31st, 2016. 2,704 between January and 2017, 4,235 in 2018. Now, what's important about this is all the data of the other side intentionally unders the numbers because they want you to think it's not been such a big deal. In fact, we've grown incredibly fast. If you compare the data to, let's say, the Netherlands or Belgium, as much as it's a terrible thing that's going on there, we have outstripped their numbers very fast. Very, very fast. We are the reason not to legalize. If you're in Germany, Spain, Portugal is going to be debating euthanasia. Now, Italy, the courts just legalized assisted suicide. But if you're in these countries debating it, Canada is the example. We are the example as to why not to do it. We are the slippery slope. So, and then they just recently said in the court decision, in the Truchon court decision, what did the Quebec Court of Appeal, the Quebec Superior Court say? Well, there's been no signs of any problems in Quebec or in Canada. Well, they didn't read the third interim report. And if you read the third interim report out of Quebec, now here's the point. In Canada, the data is very minimal and very slow coming to us. Okay? Very slow. I had requested every province provide me the data, and I got a response from 2 provinces, Alberta and Ontario. So I get monthly data from Alberta and Ontario. Everywhere else said no. Now, why do we get data from Ontario? Because of the abortion decision that that data was to be provided. Therefore, they're just assuming that they must provide the euthanasia data. It's not being hidden in Ontario. Anyway, the point of it is in Quebec, they actually have better data than the rest of Canada. The Quebec law actually set up a triple reporting system, believe it or not. That doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. So they have reports that come in from who? From the doctor who kills you, from the regional doctors who have to report to the college. So they set up in Quebec a system where there'll be certain regional people in charge. So someone in Quebec City, Montreal, regional people in charge of making sure these deaths are occurring. And then also the pharmacists. So we know how many dispensing of drugs has occurred. You have a fair amount of data, okay? Whereas the rest of Canada, what is the data? The data is only from the doctor who kills you. So this is a safe system we have in Canada. The Canadian system works this way. Either a doctor or nurse practitioner can approve, and it takes 2 of them to approve. And then the doctor who approves is the one who gets to kill you. And then the doctor who kills you is the one, or the nurse practitioner, gets to send in the report. And then they say, oh, well, you see, this is going to have a fair and equitable reporting system. Well, when somebody kills you and they do so in a way that does not really fit the criteria of the law, are they going to self-report abuse of the law? Are they going to self-report questionable things? The answer is no. Well, in Quebec, we've had a little bit of self-reporting. The Quebec third interim report showed that, so this came out reporting things up to March 31st, 2018. So it's still quite old data. 171 of the deaths were unaccounted for. 171 deaths unaccounted for. Yeah. 10% of the deaths did not fit the criteria of the law. Oh, I didn't have it here, but I should. 142 simply were not reported. So how do we know they weren't accounted for? So what you have is you have the doctors reporting, and you have the regional reports coming in. So you're showing that 142 of the deaths, the doctor never sent in the report. So you have the regional report showing that death occurred, euthanasia deaths occurred, that data is coming out, but you don't have a report coming in from the doctor did it. 19 of the people did not fit the eligibility of the law, and 3 of those people had no serious or incurable illness. 10% of the total deaths did not fit the criteria of the law. 23 people, the doctor provided no information. The doctor sent in a report with a name on it. That's it. I killed Miss So-and-so. Done. Thank you. There's your report. 27 people, the doctor did not provide suitable information, meaning the information on the report was so minimal they couldn't, there's nothing there to figure out, right? There's nothing there to assess. So in fact, you do have abuse of the law in a minimally 3 cases. You have underreporting going on, which is no different than other jurisdictions. Now here's the other question. We have none of this data out of Ontario. Right? Out of Ontario, all you get is a report from the doctor. So if underreporting has gone on, we would never know. If there's more than 7,949 deaths in Canada because of underreporting, we would never know. It's impossible to know because the system is designed to cover up. The system is designed for us not to know. So euthanasia has been redefined into all this nice terminology to make us feel better. Actually, I jumped a slide because I did something wrong earlier. So in the past few years, euthanasia-assisted suicide has gone from the Benelux countries and the Oregon experiment to a worldwide philosophical lie. And let's call it what it is. It's killing. And let's really call it what it is. It's a lie. I really liked the previous presentation. I'm not sure if it was the doctor talking about the fetal issues. But nonetheless, the problem with euthanasia is it kills people, but also it denies the nature of the human person. Let's talk about the nature of the human person. It denies our human nature. I'll get into that in a second. Italy just legalized assisted suicide with a court decision. You might have saw that. I reported that, but I also reported that the Prime Minister of Italy, he's a little bit unsure about this concept. So we don't know yet what's going to happen. The problem with Italian governments is they've had in the last few elections, last election in particular, they've had more of a left-leaning government. But the problem also is they are not, they're minority governments. So everything is worked out in the back room, and some things will never work out in the back room, right? This year in the U.S., more than 20 states debated assisted suicide bills. Most of the states rejected assisted suicide, while Maine and New Jersey legalized assisted suicide. Sadly, New Jersey, because it's a major state, sadly Maine, nonetheless, too. Maine legalized by one vote. In the U.S., it is legal in quite a few states now, as you see. The Montana court decision did not legalize assisted suicide, but provided a defense of consent, so assisted suicide occurs in Montana. So that's the slide I jumped over by mistake. So anyway, euthanasia has been defined into nice terminology to make us feel better. Medical aid in dying. Wonderful stuff, eh? Medical aid in dying. We all want aid in dying, don't we? So hey, this is a good thing, and it's medical. So we've medicalized it. They don't need doctors to kill you. I've been in this euthanasia business for a very, very long time, as Jackie explains, more than 20 years. Sadly, guys, I know how to kill you. Okay? Palliative care is being pressured to change. It's another thing. Serious problem. Palliative care have always been our allies. What's happened over the last so many years is you have a lot of the euthanasia lobby who have entered into the palliative care field. They see that as a good place to be because it's part of end of life, right? Palliative care has changed and is changing, not universally. There's many palliative care physicians who are holding the line and fighting back. The point of the euthanasia lobby is they want to normalize euthanasia and assisted suicide, and they're doing that by defining it as end-of-life care. Now in Canada, it's particularly bad because we've got two pieces of legislation. We've got the national, the federal law, and we've got the Quebec law. The Quebec law had to euthanize euthanasia. How? How did they legalize euthanasia? As health care. And how did they define it? They defined it as part of palliative care. That's how they did it, okay, in Quebec. Quebec decided to legalize euthanasia quicker, ahead of time. So provincially, you can only do it by health care. You know, the province does not control the criminal code. Federally, it's done by the criminal code. And how did the federal government do it? They created an exception to homicide. So anybody tells you that euthanasia is not killing, according to the federal government, it is killing. But it's an exception to homicide. So long as you do this, you can kill somebody. That's how the law is defined, okay? So yes, it is homicide. Let's not be innocent about this. Several countries have had court decisions, I mentioned Italy, such as Germany, to create a veneer of legalization. Euthanasia has become the issue of the political left. So if I was talking to you 10 years ago, I would have said to you that euthanasia and assisted suicide creates strange bedfellows because we've been able to create a coalition of people with disabilities, medical professionals, pro-life people, and they cross the political spectrum. What's happened is that, especially in the U.S. more so, we've seen that the Compassionate Choices with their multi-million-dollar campaigns have been able to infiltrate and push hard within the Democrat Party to ensure that assisted suicide be seen as an issue of the Democrat Party. So this is a difficulty. So in states where they get a supermajority, the Democrat Party wins a supermajority in the election, we now recognize it as a problem for assisted suicide. Shouldn't be that way. If I were a left political person, I would think that euthanasia and assisted suicide should never be legalized because it could become an instrument of the state. Nonetheless, the fact is it's become a politically left issue. I wish it hadn't. It's becoming a problem. It's all about a lie anyway. Euthanasia, assisted suicide, is sold to us in a series of lies. How many of you have seen the Fatal Flaws film? Quite a few of you. Not all of you yet. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Well, that's okay. I have a few here. I can sell them to you. We are told that euthanasia is about freedom, choice, and autonomy. Freedom. Who doesn't want freedom? And who doesn't want choice and who doesn't want autonomy? That's what we're told. It's all about that. It's not true. It's a lie. We're told that these people are dying anyway. They're not necessarily. Alan Nichols was not dying. There was nothing about him which was dying. Okay? He might have claimed to be suicidal. That's what the family thinks. He probably was at the moment suicidal. But he wasn't actually dying in any way. Some of these people would have lived for years. We're told these laws have effective safeguards, but the language is undefined. Look at the Canadian law. Everything about it's undefined. Undefined. It was done on purpose. Now we see in the whole interviews with Trudeau in the last couple of days, he says, well, you know, we anticipated cultural shift. right? We anticipated this. We anticipated some court decisions. Well, that's exactly what I was telling people at the time. This bill is designed to expand. It's designed that way intentionally. If you look at the Oregon law for assisted suicide, it's undefined properly. It's clearly using loose enough language that you can drive a hearse through it. Thank you. We're told that it's only for competent people who can make a clear request. The whole point about Alan Nichols' family is they're saying Alan was definitely not competent. He clearly was not a competent person. If they had looked at his record closer, they would have noticed that he was clearly not a competent person. That doesn't mean he wasn't a nice person. I mean, he was not a competent person. Yes?
If you're not a competent person mentally, how can you designate a PON?
Because he was not declared incompetent. Now, how the law works in Ontario or in British Columbia is very quite clear. I'm sure it's the same in the U.S. You're considered competent until you're declared incompetent. So he was never declared incompetent. But if you talk to the family, clearly, he was not competent. He was not capable of doing these things for himself. He was, going in deep depression on a constant basis. That means that he might be competent today, and then 4 or 5 days later, something happened in his life, and now he's just, out of his normal state, right? Because of how he's reacted. Yes?
Surely then, didn't they have a duty? Like if they thought he was suicidal or they thought there was some psychiatric problems, didn't they have a duty to ensure his competence?
The crazy thing about this, Jackie, and the family mentioned it to me over and over again, and they mentioned it to Avis Favreau, and it showed up in the news clip. He was brought by the RCMP to the hospital to protect him from himself. Think about this. Put it in perspective. Yeah, it's so funny, you can't laugh at it. It's crazy. Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Jackie. The family begged. Right? As soon as they heard he was going to die, the family from Edmonton, his brother who was in the Avis Favreau clip, and his wife, they flew to BC and visited him at the hospital in Chilliwack. The picture I put up there was the day before he died, right? Anyway, they begged the doctors, no, please reassess him. He's not capable right now. Let him get out of his depression. Anyway, they begged. Is euthanasia about freedom and autonomy? Well, my clip won't work, but if you've seen Fatal Flaws, you'll know this clip. Marguerite explains in Fatal Flaws how her mother died by euthanasia without any request. How could this happen? Well, her mother had pneumonia. It was brought to the hospital. She's on her way to the hospital. So she's driving to the hospital and her phone rings. Now, you're not supposed to answer the phone while driving. Okay? But anyway, she spoke to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, you don't have to hurry. He says, you don't have to hurry because we've given your mother an injection she will not wake up from. After her mother died, she goes to the doctor with her daughter, so it's good to always go in twos, right? And she says, well, why did you do this? Why didn't you just intubate my mother? Why would you give her a lethal injection? And the doctor says, well, you weren't here. So someone had to make a decision, so I decided. He said, I called the GP, and the GP said, well, she didn't want to leave her house. She was depressed. She was lonely. And Marguerite says, my mother wasn't depressed and lonely. Now, what it was is she was in her early 90s, and the doctor made the decision. We've been talking about this stuff for years. We've had stories about this for years, and then we had the Marguerite story, which told us exactly how it happens in these places. The doctor decided. He says, well, someone had to decide, so I made the decision. Oh, this is all about choice. Well, what about Candace Lewis? Was this about choice? Did Candace Lewis beg? Now, she's still alive, Candace. I regularly communicate with Candace and her mother. Great people. This mama bear, Candace's mother, Sheila, she's a real mama bear. There was no one who was going to kill her daughter. I can tell you about this, a lot about this family. But anyway, Candace is 25 years old, was born with significant disabilities. She goes to the hospital. She is very sick. There's no question about it. She's very sick. The doctor's saying, your daughter's dying. And the doctor's doing what? He's pressuring them for euthanasia. He's saying, did you know assisted death is legal? And Sheila says, I didn't know assisted death was legal. Well, he's saying, well, I want to help you with this. I want us to do this. Should be done, right? No. And then, the doctor looks right down into Candace's face and says, do you know how sick you are? Oh, this is all about freedom, choice, and autonomy, isn't it? This is our freedom, right? This is wonderful. This is not about freedom, choice, and autonomy. Not for everyone. For some people, there's some radical autonomists out there. There's others who are very depressed who think this is about their freedom and are dying because of abandonment. What about the situation? So what happened with this story is Sheila took Candace home. Because remember, the doctors are saying, Candace is dying. She's dying. And so what's Sheila thinking? Sheila's thinking, well, you're not going to kill my daughter. But if my daughter is dying, then she should die at home. So what did Sheila do? Against the wishes of the doctors and everyone, what did she do? She took her daughter home to die. And the neighbors helped out. People she knows helped out to care for Candace as they thought she was dying. Candace got better. Candace got better. She did not die. Now, does everyone go home with their mother carrying her on the back? No, I don't say, well, does everyone go home that way and then live? Well, no. But the doctor wanted euthanasia for Candace. Thought that was the most caring thing to do, right? Candace is still alive today. Yeah. Is euthanasia for people who are dying or nearing death? Well, last week the Quebec court struck this down, this terminal illness provision. But then you have to know that in all jurisdictions where this is legal, the only laws that specify that a person must be terminally ill are in the U.S. So in the Netherlands, Belgium, you don't have to be terminally ill at all, right? Not Luxembourg. And those laws have actually been interpreted in a wider manner. So what it says in Oregon, you must have 6 months to live. But what does it mean to have 6 months to live, really? It's hard to define. We've got a few physicians here. We can ask them what it means that 6 months to live. But even then, it's not been interpreted that way. So in Oregon, the official interpretation is if you say no to medical treatment and you have 6 months to live, you qualify. Well, there are lots of people who have medical conditions that require treatment. What about someone who is insulin-dependent diabetic? Insulin-dependent diabetic person can live for many, many years so long as they're properly caring for their diabetic condition, right? But if they say no to insulin, they will die within 6 months for sure. Now they qualify for euthanasia. And that's how the law is interpreted. Okay? So even that doesn't really flow. So all of the euthanasia laws, what do they actually do? They give the doctors the right in law to cure their patients. This is what it's about. And when does it happen? It happens when the patient is at a low time of their life. This is what it's about. It's about abandoning me. That's what it's about. It's not about my freedom, my choice, or my autonomy. It's all a lie. What about Jeanette Hall? Jeanette Hall wanted to die by assisted suicide. Many of you have seen the Jeanette Hall story several times. If you haven't, you should get Fatal Flaws, or you could just Google Jeanette Hall. She wanted assisted suicide, and she qualified for assisted suicide. She had cancer. She did not want the treatment. She wanted the pills. She wanted the pills. And she went to a doctor who was, the doctor she was referred to was a doctor who was opposed to assisted suicide, a physician who was part of the Physicians for Compassionate Care group. So what did he do? He talked to her. He found out what made Jeanette tick. And what he found out was that she had a son. She only had one son, but she had a son. And her son was where? He was in police college. And so what did her doctor say to her? Jeanette, wouldn't you want to see your son graduate from police college? And Jeanette said, of course I do. Of course I do. And so he said, well, if you accept treatment, I can guarantee you will live long enough at least to see your son graduate from police college. And sure enough, not only that, then once the treatment began, he said to her, well, why don't you want to see your son get married someday? And she she now had a purpose to live. The Jeanette Hall story defines this out for us very well. People don't ask for assisted suicide or euthanasia because they're in pain. That's the minority. There's very few people who are demanding lethal injection or lethal drugs because they're in pain. There are a few. The data shows very, very few. In fact, this study done by Linda Ganzini in Oregon a few years ago looked at 58 people who had asked for assisted suicide, and she interviewed these people, right? Why were you asking for assisted suicide? She asked them to rate out of 5. Not one of the 58 people rated their pain and suffering as to the reason they're asking for it as greater than 2 out of 5. Not one of them did. So I'm not saying that nobody was experiencing pain and symptom management issues. What I'm saying is in the Ganzini study, not one of them rated their pain as greater than 2 out of 5. So it wasn't because of pain. If you look at the data clearly, it's not about pain. What is it about? It's about feelings of hopelessness. It's about not wanting to be a burden on others, right? Loss of hope, not wanting to be a burden on others. Fear of future suffering. I fear future suffering. I'm doing a big run on Sunday. These are the reasons. Also, we have this feeling. We go into depression. We are experiencing feelings of abandonment. The previous message about, just being with somebody as they're going through this difficult time, such as in a perinatal hospice situation, is important. It's the same idea with someone who might be experiencing life-limiting conditions, because feelings of abandonment and loss of hope are primary to them. What's the purpose of my life? So here's the problem with euthanasia and assisted suicide. When we were debating this in Canada, they kept on saying, this will give me the right to ask, that's how they defined it, the euthanasia lobby, the right to ask to have someone to kill me. Well, no, it never did that. They always had the right to ask to have someone to kill them. No, that never changed. The only thing that changed was now when you're in your low time of your life, now when you're going through your loss of hope, your loss of purpose, you're abandoned. Because now when you ask to have someone to end your life, which is a normal human response in many circumstances, you might feel, I have no purpose. Now someone can actually kill you. So what changes in the law when you legalize is someone can actually kill you when you're at your low time of your life. That's what it's about. Somebody having the right and law to kill you. Okay? And this affects all of us. So we, in the sense, in the past, made a mistake because we defined this as vulnerable people. And actually, it has everything to do with vulnerable people, but all of us are vulnerable. Why? Because we're human. I'm running out of time. Okay, gotta get moving. Because we're human, we're all vulnerable. Everybody in this room is a vulnerable person at different times in our life. Even people of great faith go through the deep, dark time of the soul. Right? We're all vulnerable. And when this becomes legal, it's when I'm at the low time of my life that now someone can inject me and kill me. That's what's been changed. It's abandonment. Do these laws have effective safeguards? Well, in all jurisdictions, these laws are designed to give the doctors the power to kill. Canada's law says the doctor must only be of the opinion that I fit the criteria of the law. They've got no fear. When they inject you, Barry, they've got no fear at all that something's going to happen to them. They'll say, I was of the opinion that he fit the criteria of the law. The system of oversight is self-reporting. It's designed to cover up abuse. It's designed to safeguard the doctor from repercussions for killing. And think about it. It all makes sense. Because on June 16th, 2016, euthanasia was homicide. On June 17th, it was medical aid in dying. When you do that in a culture, you need to create a law that will give the physician cover. And the reason's obvious, because why would a physician kill you if they have fear of repercussions? They're not going to do it. Doctors are not, radical types. They're actually quite conservative in their reactions, and they don't look forward to ever going to jail or being brought before a court or a jurisdictional issue. These laws apply to people with psychiatric conditions. At least our laws do. These are old studies, but they're powerful studies. New England Journal of Medicine, August 3rd, 2017, indicated that there were 431 assisted deaths without request in 2015 in the Netherlands. Well, I've already shown you that there's unreported deaths in Quebec. Study published in New England Journal of Medicine, April 19, 2015, indicated that there were more than 1,000 assisted deaths without request in Belgium. That's a very paternalistic medical system to do that. Sorry, guys. That's an incredibly paternalistic medical system. When you can have a system, and in 2013, the study finds over 1,000 deaths without request, assisted deaths. That's unbelievable if you consider the size of Belgium. That study is shocking. But what's even more shocking about that study is that's a study that was done actually a few years earlier. There was a 2007 study, and in fact, the 2013 study showed that nothing had changed in Belgium over 6 years. And of course, the third Quebec report showed 142 unreported euthanasia deaths. What happened in those unreported deaths? I don't know. How many occur in Ontario? I don't know. There's no way to know in Ontario. At least Quebec's got this multiple reporting system. They're the only ones that I know of in the world that had that system. In Oregon also, if you look at the data, there's several deaths every year. When you look at the assisted suicide data, there's several deaths every year that they have no information about. None at all. What happened to those people? I have another question. In the state of Oregon, and I'm glad this is being recorded because then someone can hear this. In the state of Oregon, when they prescribe you the lethal drugs and you go pick them up and they sit by your bedside, and then you died a natural death that night. Well, some people die a natural death and never take the drugs, right? What happened to the drugs? Who's at the death in Oregon? The data tells you who's there. And who brags about being there? Compassion and Choices volunteers are at the death. Why? Because 7% of the time, the physician's at the death. Who's at the death the rest of the time? Compassion and Choices volunteers. So what happens when the Compassion and Choices volunteer shows up the day after your death and the drugs were never used? These are valuable commodities, my friends. Very valuable. I know what happens to it. They know what happens to it. Fatal Flaws features interviews with the euthanasia lobby and people like us who've had fatal flaws stories. And so it's a very important film. If you haven't seen it, you should be seeing it. You should be showing it in your parishes, your churches, etc. It should be seen. It was produced not so we can make millions of dollars, because in fact you lose not millions. You lose money producing a film. No, it's produced so you can show it. You can wake people up. They can understand the issue at hand. And that's the information there. Medical professionals in Canada are a serious problem, in Ontario in particular. I'm going to go through the conscience issues quickly with you. So medical professionals are not forced to participate or refer for euthanasia in Belgium or the Netherlands. Now, there's expectations that they do refer, and if you talk to any physicians in the Netherlands and Belgium, they'll tell you there's who won't refer, they'll tell you there's significant pressure upon them to do so. But there's nothing forcing them to do so. In the U.S., most states do not require referral. In fact, most of the laws specifically say they don't have to refer, except for the Connecticut law is interpreted to require a medical professional to provide information on assisted suicide. That's how it's interpreted. The New Jersey bill that just passed says nothing about referral. So that's the first state that actually says nothing about it. So in the Oregon law, it says that doctors don't have to do it. They don't have to refer. New Jersey, it says nothing. So what is that going to mean in the future? I don't know about conscience rights in New Jersey, what's going to happen in the future, but it says nothing. There's no protection in the law. Okay? In Canada, the conscience battle has been fought provincially. Manitoba passed a bill in November 2017 protecting medical professional conscience rights. Manitoba is the only province to do so. If you're a medical doctor wanting to come to Canada, go to Manitoba. We can use you here, but anyway. The Ontario College of Physicians and Surgeons passed a policy requiring doctors to refer for MAID, euthanasia and assisted suicide, and the Ontario College of Nurses passed the same policy requiring an effective referral. And a group of physicians unsuccessfully challenged this in court. The court decided that requiring a referral was a reasonable infringement on their rights in order to provide access. So the court recognized that they have a right to their conscience, but it said there was a reasonable infringement upon this right in order to ensure access to killing. Okay? So doctors in Ontario are technically required to provide an effective referral. Okay?
What court level at? Which court level?
Well, it's not been appealed, but that was at the Court of Appeal. Okay, so it was at the lower court and then went to the Court of Appeal. I'm going to say something that maybe I shouldn't say. I'm assuming it won't be appealed. And the reason it won't be appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada is if the Supreme Court of Canada, which does not have many of our friends sitting there, makes a bad decision, then it becomes a national problem rather than an Ontario problem. St. Martha's Hospital, Nova Scotia. Sisters of St. Martha, poor ladies. So it's the only major hospital in Antigonish, St. Martha's Hospital. So Jocelyn Downey, once again, who's Jocelyn Downey? She is the leading academic euthanasia activist in Canada from Nova Scotia. She chose St. Martha's Hospital because they had a signed agreement with the government of Nova Scotia. So what happened is St. Martha's Sisters passed the hospital over to the government in the 90s, but they had an agreement with the government saying that the hospital must maintain its Catholic identity and its Catholic values. So in the reports, the euthanasia lobby has stated that there are dozens of... So what happened is the government unilaterally changed the agreement and is forcing St. Martha's Hospital to do euthanasia, but St. Martha's has decided that it will be done, but not in a building connected to St. Martha's Hospital. It's actually connected, but it's not actually part of the hospital. So what they're saying is, okay, euthanasia is going to occur, but it's not going to be occurring on our piece of property. It'll be on this other spot, which is technically connected to the hospital, but it's not part of St. Martha's Hospital. Now, I have some news to give you. Actually, the property where the euthanasia is going to take place is actually the original St. Martha's Hospital. The new building, so when they built a new building and that became St. Martha's Hospital, the old building, which is connected actually to the new building, became a separate health entity. That's where euthanasia is going to take place. But that's actually the original St. Martha's Hospital. Just telling you that, I'm sorry. In the reports, the euthanasia lobby stated that there are dozens of Catholic hospitals and nursing homes that do not provide MAID, and they want the rest of Catholic medical institutions to follow the St. Martha's model. In fact, what happened, as I say, St. Martha's is not actually allowing it on their premises. It's in other premises, as I already explained to you the crazy situation about it. And the euthanasia lobby is now going to pressure all religiously affiliated healthcare institutions. They're going to try and force them to do euthanasia. That's what's coming. That's what we're going to see in the courts next. Recently, I have several phone calls from nurses being pressured to participate in MAID. Now, why nurses? Well, what happens is that the MAID has decided it's going to happen at 3 o'clock, and the nurse might be on staff in that department, and she is told, oh, we're going to need your help with the MAID. Come on, it's at 3 o'clock, come to room such and such. So I'm getting calls from these nurses, and where do these nurses come from? Smaller communities. And I have to challenge some of my supporters, okay, because I got several emails from nurses who are in major hospitals in Ontario, such as Toronto, where there's great big hospitals, and they're saying, I don't know what's wrong with these nurses, because, in our hospital we have a MAID committee, so we're not being forced to do anything. Well, in a small hospital, they don't have a MAID committee. MAID committees are the doctor and the nurses who will just go and kill you, right? They go from bed to bed killing you because it's all been set up that way. And so you have a big enough hospital, they have a MAID team. Well, the MAID team then gives other nurses and other doctors conscience rights because they don't have to participate because the MAID team does it, right? But what if you're in St. Thomas, Ontario? They don't have a MAID team in St. Thomas, Ontario. So anyway, these nurses are being pressured. This shows that conscience rights can be a greater problem in small communities. What does the actual rule say by the Ontario College? I'm running out of time. It says that doctors must do an effective referral. It said that in the case of an emergency, they must actually do the act, is what it says. So let's say you're a doctor who's felt called to serve northern communities because you know that they have very few medical practitioners up there. So now you're way up in, who knows, Timbuktu, and you're being a physician who's being caring, recognizing that the population up there needs medical care, and now someone asks you for MAID. You're stucco, man. You're stuck. Because you can't refer to anybody else because there isn't anybody else. That's the problem with conscience rights. You have to ensure conscience rights. Euthanasia sold its way to eliminate suffering, to prevent people from dying in pain. That's how it's sold to us. Very few people are actually asking for euthanasia because of pain. It's not true. It's the sales pitch, right? Wave the flag. Loss of autonomy, decreasing ability to participate in enjoyable activities. These are reasons people ask. Their life has lost purpose. They feel a loss of personal value. They feel they've lost their reason to live. They feel depressed or emotionally lost. Guess what? Those are normal human realities for all of us. Not one of us will not experience that in some way, some of us more so than others. So there's nothing new about these feelings. The only difference with euthanasia is that someone can now kill you when you're going through a normal human response to your life-limiting condition. Normal for you to feel that way. Some of us are very fortunate to have strong family connections, so maybe we will feel those feelings less, or maybe we'll feel it differently because of whatever. Nonetheless, don't be saying, well, as a Catholic, we don't have to worry about it because, guess what? People in my church have faith and they won't want this. I'm sorry to say this to you, but our Catholics, our Christian Reformed, our people are also dying about euthanasia. Why? Because they're reacting to the same human feelings and realities. How do we protect our own is now really the issue at hand for many of us. We recognize our role in informing people of the problems with euthanasia and the direction of the euthanasia lobby. I look at this as Canada, sadly, and I'm very sad to say this, is the best example of why other jurisdictions should never legalize euthanasia. We are the best example. They should be using Canadian data and information. I'm trying to make it aware, make the world aware, our friends across the world aware of this data and information so they can use us as the bad situation, because we are. Thousands of people read articles that I'm publishing. If you look at my blog information, I get thousands of hits worldwide, and I'm happy that's happening because maybe we're making a difference. I have a couple of bragging points. American Medical Association recently maintained its position against assisted suicide. I'm proud to say I had a lot to do with that. I'm very happy to say that. I wasn't a key as in the person hanging out in the back rooms negotiating, no, but I was intimately involved with the key players to make that happen. I was very proud to do that. Why? Because I've got years of experience, and that's the only thing I can offer, and it's something. We recently stopped assisted suicide in New Mexico. That was a great gift to do that. I was very pleased with that. And now we're involved with this compassionate community care training. We had our first session last Saturday. Compassionate community care is a separate group, though, separate entity. But now the concept is, how do we protect our own? Life Canada has got the Dying Healed program. This is a very important that we recognize that something that used to be normal in our life is now gone in many places, and that is the being with people who are dying, being with those in our community. That's 50 years ago, that was like the normal thing. That was what people did. It was part of the cultural understanding of how we lived. And in many places, it's completely gone. Not everywhere, thank God. And it's time to reignite that, to reignite the concept that I need to be with you. I need to be that person to journey with you. Why? Because you are human. You are human, and as a human being, you are interdependent. And as a human being, you need me and I need you. But when your time of need is there, maybe, just possibly, my presence, well, maybe not my presence, I might actually cause you to know what's, I don't know. But our presence will make a difference in people's lives. Can I guarantee you that being with someone is going to always change their mind? No, I wish I could, but I can't. But can I guarantee you that you can change people's lives? Yes, I can guarantee you that people's lives will be changed by caring for others. Last Saturday, we had our session, our Compassion Community Care session in Woodstock. And then on Sunday, I went to visit a friend of mine in Windsor. And he's a retired deacon. And he's got early dementia. And he's very, 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 very depressed. And so I went down to Windsor with Susan, my beautiful wife. And we went to visit him. And we got into he's in a nursing home now. He's got dementia. So, sadly... but it was a good nursing home. I have to admit, they're paying real money to be there. That's a nice nursing home. Gosh, it was really nice. Anyway, the point is that we went in there, and his lunch was still sitting there. Hadn't touched it. So we said to the nurse that's in there, well, he hasn't eaten. And she said he refused to eat. His juice was not touched. It was still covered, everything. And he was very, very down. So you start talking to him. Well, we stayed a long time. I didn't stay a long time because I wanted to impose myself upon him. Because I realized that once I was there for a while, suddenly he got out of bed. He sat in his chair. We started talking. He couldn't remember everything. Actually, most things he couldn't, but we started talking. He started feeling upbeat. He started feeling a lot better. Suddenly he says, I want to drink something. He wanted to eat something. I stayed for dinner only because I knew that if I were there, he was going to eat. And he did. He willingly ate his food. There was no problem, no question. There was no issues. And after he was done eating, Susan and I left, and we went somewhere and had our own dinner. He was constantly offering me his food, and I was like, no, it's your food. No problem. I actually looked pretty good, nonetheless. Well, why? Because he was down and depressed. If I hadn't come that day, I guarantee you he would not have eaten his dinner. He would not have touched that dinner. And it was good dinner, too, actually. He wouldn't have touched it. Why? He was down. It's a normal human reality. Let's stop thinking about, these vulnerable people. And this is my information. So I got some newsletters there on the table. You could take them. I have something else for you. I know my time's up, Jackie. I know. I've talked too long. And Jim's got to go. Okay, I'm going to take some questions. We have these cards here. Emily, who works for me, keeps loading up these cards. This is a USB card. And I used to sell my book. I don't sell my book anymore. I sell the USB card. My book is on the USB card. But what we did is all the major studies, everything that I consider to be an important study or an important article in euthanasia-assisted suicide has been loaded on this card. So for $20, all the information that you don't want to know about death is on here. I'm serious. This is a very amazing resource. And you see it's a USB card. You flip that out. You stick it in your computer. It's all here. All of it. Okay? And you can read my book. The other thing is, Emily did it that where it was possible, the links are live. So if you're reading the article, you can hit the link and it goes to... Some of those links aren't any good anymore because, that's what happens with the internet. $20. I used to sell my book for $20. Now you can get this for $20. I'm just going to finish my commercial and you can ask all the questions you want.
No, I think you have a lot of information. It's worth knowing. We didn't get to euthanasia in Canada and assisted suicide because Canadians wanted it. We got it through the courts.
I know, we got it through the courts.
I think it's worth remembering people with how that.
Yeah, we defeated it in 2010 in a big way. We really defeated it in 2010. And they knew it. I explained to people after that the euthanasia lobby was getting ready for the courts. That's what they were going to do. And that's what they did. I've got these Air Miles cards. I travel all over the place speaking. My good friend over here, we were on the same speaking circuit in Moldova, land of wine. Anyway, and so why would I meet someone in Moldova? Because I'm doing a euthanasia talk. He's doing an abortion talk in the mighty... Yeah, so if you need a fresh one because yours is getting worn out. So these Air Miles allow me to go all over the place speaking. I'll be in Calgary and Edmonton pretty soon. And I was just asked to speak in Delaware. A lot of times they call you to speak. They say, well, we don't have enough money for you. Can we do this, da-da-da-da? And I say, well, if you pay the taxes on the flight, because the Air Miles still charge you the taxes, I've got the Do Not Kill Me card. So I book it with Air Miles, and they pay me the taxes, right? So it doesn't cost anything. It's cheap that way. I have the Do Not Kill Me cards. Put them in your wallet. Sign them. If you want a tattoo, that works too. The euthanasia deception, I'm not selling it anymore, but if you give me a donation, I'll give you the card. And on it has a code. So the live, you can watch it live. You can show it to anybody because it's on the internet live. And if you have the code, you can get it, okay? And I take donation. And I got the Fatal Flaws film for $30. And you have some questions. Yes, ma'am.
I just signed up with Assured Life Canada for my funeral. For peace of mind for me and my kids. Now, the only thing they told me about that is that if I commit suicide, they're not going to pay out. So I'm going to be paying for 5, 10, 15 years into that. Then suddenly something happens.
Okay, that does nothing to do with euthanasia or assisted suicide.
No, it does because if I commit
No, it doesn't. The law was defined. The law said that this is not a suicide. Therefore, if you died by assisted suicide or euthanasia, now here, let's be clear. Everyone dies by euthanasia. The federal government legalized euthanasia and assisted suicide. Euthanasia is me lethally injecting you. Assisted suicide is me giving you the same drugs and you take it yourself. According to the data, there's been 6 assisted suicides as of December 31st, and the rest are all euthanasia. Euthanasia is far easier to do, so that's why people want it over assisted suicide. So yes, it's not defined as a suicide, therefore it would pay out. I'm not suggesting please do euthanasia because it's going to pay out, you get your money quicker. No, what I'm saying to you is it does not affect that. No. Yes, ma'am.
In your professional, informed opinion, the time is coming because it's cheaper to kill us than cure us. Where are we on the spectrum where we won't get to have this discussion because we want to avoid pain, etc., or our family will be involved? When will this decision be made by the medical team without even consulting us or our family?
Okay, so according to the law, that will never happen. But remember what happened in the Netherlands recently, and I should have put that slide up too, is the case of the woman in the Netherlands who, she put it in her power of attorney, but now she has dementia. So it said, when I'm of such and such a condition, I would want euthanasia. So now she has dementia, and the family's decided, okay, on Saturday we're going to, you know, have mom die by euthanasia. They come over there, and she's saying no. She's resisting. No, no, no. She's saying no. Now remember, she's got dementia, so maybe, you know, no, but she's saying no. So the doctor put the sedative in her coffee, gave her the coffee, right? Well, she continued to resist and say no. So it was a female doctor. She had the family hold her as she was injected. So that's not very pleasant to think of. But I mean, what happened is that the Euthanasia Commission said that the doctor broke the law, but did it in good faith, so it was okay. But then that was challenged, so the Dutch prosecutor, brought that to the courts, not to prosecute the doctor, but to get clarity. And what did the Dutch court recently say? Who reads my stuff? It was okay, nothing wrong with that. In fact, the doctor did the right thing. Now the prosecution service has asked for it to go to the Dutch Supreme Court because they're not happy with that definition. They're not asking for this doctor to be prosecuted or to get in trouble. They're just saying, this doesn't make sense to us, this decision. We want it defined better. And that's the next step. But I mean, that woman was saying no, 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 and yet she died anyway. I don't know. I don't want to bring you all bad news. The good news is that there's only one way you can make a difference in this world. There is only one way. We think it's got to do with politics and everything else, and then we get Andrew Scheer. There's only one way you can make a difference in the world, and that is to love the other and care for the other. And you must do so not out of some feeling that, oh, I guess I have to do this. It's out of your personal self-giving. It's because I recognize that they are a human being, and they need me, and I need them. Okay? God bless you. See you.